about 0.2%.
Let's try Andy again. He's CEO of Drives. He joins us from Raleigh, North Carolina. Andy, I was asking about the Trump administration suspending federal funding for electric car chargers. How does a decision like that affect you?
Yeah, listen, we build software that the world's largest charge point operators, the folks that operate networks, use in order to basically bring, reliable charging to their customers. There's no doubt about it. NEVI funding was a really positive thing for the industry. If you're on the cusp or you're thinking about buying an electric car, often one of the anxieties you have is around range. So seeing more chargers is a great thing. The more you see, the more comfortable you're going to be with it. But when you think about NEVI funding and the impact, what it really means for us as an industry, as a charging industry, it's been relatively small. Kind of looking back on 2024 in the United States, there were about 14,000 new chargers added, publicly available chargers that anyone can go use.
Right.
NEVI was responsible for about 120, 130 of those chargers. So we're talking about 0.01% of all the chargers added in the United States last year had anything to do with NEVI.
This is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program that you're referring to, NEVI.
Yes, okay. My apologies. Yes, exactly. And so if you think about it, essentially it was an absolutely positive thing, and I think it had some great benefits. And we still have a lot of projects underway, so there'll be another 1,000 chargers that are going to come to fruition as a result of that funding. But it's certainly not the thing that drives our industry.
How much, though, does an administration and a policy change drive what happens in your industry? And I bring that, we're coming off this interview here on Bloomberg with the U.S. Energy Secretary, Chris Wright. And when he says things like, one, U.S. focused on reducing the cost to produce oil. Coal will be essential in U.S. for decades to come. Says U.S. oil output can grow meaningfully. U.S. seeking to stop closure of coal-fired power plants. Commenting on nuclear. I didn't hear a lot about alternative energy. So I do wonder, how does, again, maybe nothing specifically, but how does that tone and tenor coming from the energy secretary potentially turn into policy or lack thereof in terms of supportive policy for the EV and electrification industry?
Sure. 8% of all new cars sold last year in the United States were electric. Once people drive electric cars, they tend to want them. And just stepping back from that, thinking about it, one way or the other, the endpoint for vehicles in the United States and globally is going to be electric. So the only question is, where is that endpoint? So to answer your question, I think when you have an administration that really is pushing one form of transportation, it absolutely helps. But in the end, it's going to be the consumer that makes that decision. When you look at other countries like Norway and parts of Europe, where over 90% of all new cars are electric, they didn't have federal funding in place to do that. It was around customer choice. It was around broad-based decisions.
But isn't that because a gallon of gas or a liter of gas is like $9?
Certainly the price of fuel has a lot to do with it.
And in a sense, I don't want to say we subsidize fuel because we tax it quite a bit here in the U.S., but we tax it at just a fraction of what some of our European counterparts tax it at.
Yeah, that's fair. You have very high fuel prices. Obviously, in the United States, we've been really lucky with lower fuel prices. For us as a company, my parent company, Vontier, we work with a lot of clients that don't think just electric or just gas. We think about sort of all the above, right? We have companies that focus on classic fueling, on hydrogen, and of course, my company, my focus is around electric. So, ultimately, the administration being more neutral about what that source of fuel is going to be isn't going to have much of an effect on the EV adoption rates. People are going to continue to buy EVs. They're going to continue to grow. Today, there is a massive gap between the amount of cars that are on the road that are electric already and the needed EV infrastructure. So you don't necessarily need the federal government to go help fill that gap. The companies, the charge point operators that make this their life, that make this their living, that are profitable corporations, they're going to continue to put that EV infrastructure out there because it's just plain, good business at the end of the day.
And to be fair, we did a deep dive here at Bloomberg into Norway, and they talked about various policies. There were some incentives. Their value-added taxes were scrapped. Cars were given access to bus lanes. Parking was cheaper. In many cases, free. Drivers weren't charged for using ferries or toll roads. So there was support. To be fair,
I mean, have you visited Norway?
yeah, but I'm just saying that there are things.
It's pretty amazing.
That make maybe EVs a more obvious choice for more and more new regions. I don't know. Are you hopeful about the outlook here? You know how administrations, whether it's Democratic or Republican, they come in and they've got an agenda and they have policies. We're already, producing a ton of fossil fuels. But it does look like we could have a lot more support from this administration. And you do wonder, when it comes down to choice, people are going to look at the choice of what the cars cost, and they're also going to look at the choice of, if fuel is cheap, you're not going to be so worried.
Yeah, that's fair. I look. I ultimately believe that electrification is going to take place. The experience that drivers have is such a positive experience. This change, or at least maybe thinking about this as a less subsidized industry, is not such a bad thing. All of us in industry, one of the things we hate the most is big fluctuations between different administrations. Because all those policy changes, what they do ultimately is create uncertainty. So what we want is the unit economics of EVs to get cheaper, right? As that cost of that battery gets cheaper, the cost of the car will be cheaper. It'll be more competitive. As more EV infrastructure charging gets available, it'll become normal for folks.
Yeah.
And those are just sort of natural commercial things that I think will occur.
Andy, do you think Elon Musk being involved in the government and certainly very close, it seems, with President Trump, is that a plus for the EV industry ultimately?
Yeah, Tesla was a huge recipient of course, the NEVI funding for one. But look, the industry has changed. If we had this conversation a year ago, all we would have been talking about was Tesla cars in the United States. Today, it's about 50% of all the sales in the United States. We have a lot of new vehicles out there, a lot of new competition. So look, Elon Musk, clearly, if it weren't for him, there would be no EV industry, right? There's no arguing that. All these cars, all these companies, this entire industry was spurred by the innovation of that company. But I think having him, have the chance and the opportunity to influence the administration ultimately will be really positive for what we're doing. Absolutely.
Are you concerned? We've seen reports out of Germany, other European countries as well, California, just very briefly, about fewer people buying Teslas as a result of perhaps what Elon Musk has been doing in his position in the federal government. Do other EV companies become winners because of that?
Well, like I said, almost 50% of all the EVs sold in the United States this year were not Tesla. So there's clearly a shift taking place. I don't know if that's a political response as much as it is, look, it's great.
No.
We're going to leave it there. That's Andy Bennett over at Drives. He's the CEO of Drives. It's a company that provides EV charging management software. Having a little bit trouble with his internet connection.
Yeah, it happens. Listen,
It does.
It's the world we live in.